make something that's pretty or to make something that looks legit, you still need money. So
Those with trauma from sexual abuse, for example, the experience did not begin as a narrative. Sexual assault is a smell.
Who claim that their work doesn't have anything to do with the predatory attitudes or practices that they've had that make them be able to be the known quote unquote
within the school system. Aside from the usual yung faulty na ranking system, yung current fire system ng DepEd, hindi ako regular public school.
And that's why it is important for us to keep researching history, particularly the people on the ground, particularly people outside our middle and upper class comfort.
Dito, hindi kasi ako scholar eh. So, nagtatrabaho din ako and
meron tayo naaabot.
We organized this event and discussion with the primary objectives of hearing how Filipino writers today apprehend their role as stakeholders of Philippine literature and initiating the development of a greater sense of community, a better understanding of who we are as Filipino writers and the work that we do across different places, experiences, and constraints. Like all national literatures that exist within the conditions of post-coloniality and capitalist economy, Philippine literature is troubled by and has grown to reflect uneven and discordic hierarchies and power structures. This event is intended to work toward redressing these inequities, and it does so with the assertion that Philippine literature is not a space commandeered by just one super senior writer or power block. Instead, speaking of the complexities of Philippine literature should be an evolving and ethical process that renders the multiple iterations of the Filipino writer as legible and recognizable. Writing in the Philippines is plural and should not hinge on maneuvers of tyrannical authority, should not delegitimize creative imagination, and should not recapitulate the same tired arguments fixated on the nationalist soul. Our hashtag expresses this plurality. It's not about tayo, like the old ways. It's tayo, tayo. We have divided the discussion topics into 4 categories, but they do intersect, so we will have only one open forum at the end in order to somehow synthesize issues raised throughout. Questions can be coursed through chat as we go along, and we moderators will take note of them. So because we want to hear everyone's take, particularly the 27 who registered as speakers, each of you has only up to 5 minutes to speak. We hope that we will all respect this time limit. Moderators will send a private chat message when the speaker has 1 minute to go so you can wrap up your ideas. So we'll start with category 1, which will be writing dissent and trauma, on the difficult division between the personal and political, the author and the object of their art. It will be moderated by Luisa Vix Vasquez.
Thanks, Joanna. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Wanted to say also that this is very informal. It feels like it's a conference or a symposium, but ano lang yan, ano? Parang it's just a way to sort of organize, what you want to say and really sharing yung mga iba-iba nating struggles across the regions and the different kinds of writing. So for today, yung category 1 natin, I'll just read briefly the title. It's Writing Dissent and Trauma on the Difficult Division Between the Personal and Political, the Author and the Object of Their Art. As you can see, this overlaps with maybe 2 and also 4, pero okay lang yan, ano? And we'll go by the order that's in the PDF that was sent. But if that person is not yet here or not yet available, we'll just go to the next. So again, I'll be sending you a private chat if 1 minute na lang yung natitira so you can wrap up, like Joanna said. Anyway, ayan. So kung may marinig ng mga aso-aso, ganyan, pasensya na sa Zoom meeting. But okay, so let's begin. I don't know if Aliana, Liza, Serena is already here. Because I checked the participants earlier and I don't think I saw her name. But if you're here, you can unmute. No, parang wala pa na. Sige, so we'll begin with Nimrus De Castro, who's also already here. Nimrus, the floor is yours.
Hi. Actually, I didn't intend to sign up as a speaker for this particular topic. I was actually surprised. I just checked the email and I saw that my name is listed there as a speaker. So I don't have much to say because I joined this conversation mainly because I want to hear more from the perspectives of other writers, because I'm what would you call a wild writer, a writer in the wild. I've never been trained formally. I'm not studying anything related to the field. For example, I'm taking my master's right now, but it's in political science. It's hardly creative writing. It's hardly literature. Though some would probably think that medyo related yung topic, yung what I'm studying with what we're trying to have a conversation about today. I really don't have much to say. Other than that, I want to hear more of you, more of what people has to say. Ayun.
Thanks, Imras. Maybe just talk to us about why number 1 in particular is what you're interested in, yung dissent and trauma. Can you share to us why you're interested in that category specifically, yung about the personal and political? Maybe it's because you're from political science nga, but what's the interest there?
Oh yeah, because I heard from a few writers before that you cannot separate the personal from the political, and that's something that I don't really. I mean, I think maybe or maybe not, but there are writers who can write about apolitical things, though some people would disagree with that. Ayun, so I want to explore more of that sentence, more of that thought, more of that concept. Whether is it really something that we can separate, or is the art separate from the person, or are these two things totally inseparable?
Okay, thank you, Nimras. So very valid question. So we'll see what the others also might say or have a say about those questions, or try to answer those questions specifically. So yeah, so thank you. Faye Olayo, are you here?
Hi.
Yes, here with a nice Faye. Okay, this Faye.
Hello. Okay. So I registered for this particular category because I feel like it's the most relevant category to my work. When I was registering, I wanted to highlight my personal experiences when it comes to writing and being part of the art community in Baguio and being part of several writers groups as well. So I recently created an album and it's called The Body of Work. It is a collection of poetry that I've written throughout the years, and it is a meditation on the body, on healing, and on trauma. A lot of my pieces talk about sexual abuse, harassment, and many of the things that have become commonplace with existing as a woman or someone who identifies as a woman, not just in the Philippines, but all across the world, which is depressing and disappointing enough to know and to acknowledge. The reason why I wanted to put out this work and the reason why I write about trauma and about my experiences of trauma and of abuse is because I want to take hold of the narrative. I want to be able to talk about the things that happened to me in my way. I want to be able to tell the story of my truth, because so many of the things that happened were things that were done to me. You know, I want to change the language of how we talk about sexual abuse. 3 men raped me. That's what happened. 3 people chose to do something terrible to another person. I don't like the way that we phrase of things that I got raped or I got assaulted, because it somehow it takes away the responsibility from the person who's done that. And the writing community, the art world communities in the Philippines, we are not unfamiliar with experiences of sexual abuse, of harassment, of predatory mentorship, of opportunistic uh, elders or people that you should respect in the art community that turn out to be predators. Just last year, a couple of literary workshops were highlighted, or several women had the bravery to come forward to talk about their experiences of assault and harassment in literary workshops here in the Philippines. So this isn't something that's new to us. And what I want is for at least for the language to change, for us to be able to talk in a way that acknowledges the responsibility, that wants to call out, that wants to demand accountability, that wants to demand justice, and that opens the conversation for how do we create safer spaces like this? How do we create safer communities? How do we encourage women to talk about, or folks in general, to talk about very painful experiences without being gaslit or without being silenced or, you know, without being turned away. So I want to end with, because my work is very personal and because my body of work is very personal, there is no way where I can see myself separating that from my work. So what does that say about writers who claim that their work doesn't have anything to do with the predatory attitudes or practices that they've had that made them be able to be the known quote unquote artists that they are now? So thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Faye. Certainly, na, again, issues that are raised. And thank you for pointing out that, yes, this is a safe space na parang we can talk about these issues and, writing about something that is, you cannot quite, of course, remove from yourself because it is part of you and it is your experience. So thank you. And I'm sorry to hear about, the trauma. I mean, I can't imagine. Thank you for the, even sharing that that with us. Okay, let's go to the next in the list. It's AIDS Pescador. AIDS.
Hi everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you, Faye, for sharing. I'm sure it's not easy to be open like that, but thank you for speaking. I actually chose the first category. I was also interested in categories 2 and 4. But there was wording in this category that got me thinking on the difficult division between the personal and political. I'm a queer person and I write queer fiction, and that's always been informed by my experiences as a queer person, trying to go against a very heterocentric, heterosexist, patriarchal society. So that's also what I've been thinking about when I also saw victimhood as a position. Personally, as somebody who has experienced, who has their own traumas, and forgive me if I don't share them on this venue, but I try to go by the approach that I refuse the label as a victim, if only because it the word itself sustains the power of the oppressor. And if only for that, I don't want to write from the position of a victim, or to write. I also don't want to disregard the experiences because even though I have problems with the label, the experiences and the emotions are important in informing the work. So yeah, sorry, I got kind of lost. But I hope to hear from more people today about it, and I guess for the open forum.
Thank you, Aids. Thanks also for, bringing that up, no? Yung parang, of course, and what Joanna said here about like the labels, that if we refuse to call ourselves a victim, or if you refuse to call yourself a victim, then you don't give that power to the oppressor. And a lot of it, in this category too, if you think about it, yun nga, parang when you're writing from trauma, that is a form of power, but at the same time, it might parang unnecessarily give attention also to the oppressor. Yung mga ganong ethical yung mga concerns natin na parang hindi, you're trying to take the power back, but at the same time na-highlight din siya yung mga ganong questions. So maybe that's something that we can, I think, share or talk about also when we get to the open forum. Thank you, Aids. Let's go to the next. The next in the list is Dennis Aguinaldo. Dennis?
Okay, thank you very much. I think my talk will, my small speech will touch upon yung spirit ni Adrian sa yung spirit ni Nimrus kanina. They want to listen to what people are saying. But I also want to report something. I think I'll be coming from the position of people like Faye, who are my students, and when I give them service about how they want me, how I ask them, what topics, what content, etc., things they want to learn from our creative writing class. May mga lumalabas, kasi this private, bibigay lang nila sa akin, hindi lang sasabihin sa, and they always ask for trigger warnings, or content warnings. This is new to me. When I was a student, there wasn't such a discourse. The most we had, I think, was in cinema. Meron tayong striktong paggabay or patnubay na magulang, which is age-based. But as we know, trauma is not age-based. If it's possible, it gets worse as we learn more. So yun yung isa kong concern. Should we, as curators, as teachers, label or put trigger warnings or content warnings in our works, as editors, etc. Should we solicit with also bilagyan nyo ng trigger warning yung work ninyo, especially now that it's something I hear every sem. Actually ngayon nagsasubmit na yung mga bata ng work when they know that they're going to show it to others, di ba, over Google Classroom, ganyan. Sila na mismo naglalagay without any prompting ng content warning, suicide, content warning, ganyan. It's already in their culture. I think nasa Wattpad na may mga lemon warnings tayo, etc. So I wonder how that will affect our making of art, our teaching of art, also our learning of it. Especially since yung old idea natin of art as cathartic, means that we're going to push it, diba? And articulation is repetition of these experiences, and it's possible that we can actually, in a way, ruin, or if we warn, the idea is kung hindi nyo pa kaya, wag kayong pumunta dito sa work na to, sa short story na to, sa tula na to, or sa exhibit na to. So I really would like to know. Syempre may default answer na ako, as this is hinihingin siya ng students ko, so I've been trying to put these things here, but I'm really interested in what everybody else thinks about this. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Sa mga nauna nagsalita sa akin, si Faye, si Aids, at saka si Nimrus. Yun lang.
Yes, salamat. Tama ka, marami sa atin dito ang nagtuturo din. So nagiging lalo pag creative writing at poetry, non-fiction, fiction, kapag may trauma na nakaakibat, and how to parang sort of yung sa trigger warning na parang maski sa klase, yung kahit hindi yung sinulat nila, pero yung mismong material that you're going to share with them, kung may mga ganong, and this I don't think this was a problem when I was a student na, parang mga more than a decade ago. Hindi siya nagiging issue ng mga teachers natin kung may traumatic ba doon. But yes, no, certainly points raised, very, very valid. And hopefully we can talk about that some more later. Salamat, Dennis. Ang next natin ay si Ned Parfan. Ned?
Hi. Hi, Vix.
Hello.
And thank you everyone for being here. I'm gonna stop pretending that I don't have an idiot board, so I'm just gonna read that. I'm gonna talk about writing trauma. So for me, writing trauma is a struggle of form, especially because I write poetry, which is, it's not to say that it would be easier to write CNF. It's just that with poetry you're more overt with the play of words. There's an effort to make it sound good so that it hopefully resonates. So it's a struggle of form because you're negotiating your crafting path between the pleasure of wordplay and the reevaluation of a horrific narrative. And Faye already talked about the narrative of it. But we must also understand that for those with trauma from sexual abuse, for example, the experience did not begin as a narrative. Sexual assault is a smell. It's a weight on your body. It's a touch. It's movement. And those who have experienced these are only forced to turn it into a narrative. Hindi dahil para pagpiestahan, no, but because it's probably the only way they know how to deal with it, both internally and interpersonally. And sometimes I feel as though their narratives take shape primarily to convince themselves that it's not their fault. So parang may yun yung impetus ng narrative. But for me, the experience of building the narrative was a challenge in my 20s because I started writing seriously in my early 20s. It was a challenge as well because I started remembering bits and pieces from my childhood. So poetry was a way of trying to reconstitute the fragmentation. And poetry was the only option for me because of the affordance of the mask or persona. In other words, I was afraid of being taken to court by the person I was accusing. So parang pag CNF, parang di ba? It's fiction under oath, sabi nga nila. So medyo mahirap. No. So experience was the field I harvested from to feed the world of my artifice. That for me was the solution to come to terms with the fact that I was creating something new rather than reliving an experience. And now that I feel like I'm on the other side of the struggle, having already put out the book, the alienating effect of the experience surprisingly continues. Like when someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, I enjoyed your book." Parang I'm sure that some people would be flattered by that. Pero yun nga that's the struggle of form eh. Poetry for many people is meant to be, leisure reading. It's supposed to be, something you do for pleasure. But yeah, you're not talking about pleasure. And also because I'm a man, so talking about the writing experience was also complicated by the scarcity of related literature when it comes to men writing about these. Hindi naman wala, no, and I certainly will never claim to be the first. That would be a weird thing to be proud of. But yeah, I found them in scientific journals instead of literature, journals on psychology. And now I'd like to think of myself as an observer. I watch out for new voices who write more or less in the same alley. And so I'd like to end by saying that we have to believe them. When someone attests to having experienced this, they or he or she puts everything at stake. Reputation, friends, connections, career, whether inside or outside the academe. That person knows everything will be on the line. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you also for sharing that. Again, the the form itself also you talked about na in poetry and how yung parang minsan na-aestheticize pero hindi natin sigurado kung yung pag-aestheticize pa ay tama pa din, yung mga ganyan na yung mga negotiations mo din as a writer and thinking about how this is going to be received because you know you're gonna put it out there and yet baka may mga chismoso lang, no, na parang yung mga ganyan, and that's always a concern, especially when you're writing from from trauma, from I mean biographically also, no, I mean as with any kind of writing, kahit naman fiction yan, may biography ka pa rin dyan kahit papano, pero ang hirap ng ganun, ano, yung parang re-traumatizing yourself also when you write about it, so even if you have maybe a bit of a distance or like tinatawag palagi nila Ma'am Jing na psychic distance or emotional distance, but you never really distance yourself from the trauma, as he said, no, na parang hindi naman talaga siya. It will always also be there. So, ayun. Maraming salamat, Ned. Again, hopefully, mababalikan natin to when we go to the Q&A. But for now, since we're moving on to the next category, actually, medyo meron tayong parang, I was about to say na parang ano na, mali yung term ko kasi parang bastard child ng category na to, pero hindi naman, no? It's just more of, he has to leave kasi before 3 o'clock. So we'll have to have a speaker or somebody speak also about his experience in category 3, which is yung writing from the diaspora, no? Or like yung the Filipino author as borderless, immigrant experiences published elsewhere, writing outside to scarcities of home. So si Igor Rodrigo de la Peña will speak or will talk about that.
Sorry, Suminget. Yeah, but thank you for the chance, and good afternoon to everyone. I've actually been based in Singapore for 9 years and counting. So this is the category that I selected, the Filipino writer as borderless. And as a creative writer who thinks about the idea of home from a distance, I'd like to zoom in and reflect on one word from the title of this event, other. Other means a person or a thing that is different, distinct from one already mentioned or known about. Otherness denotes difference and exclusion. And in many ways, and especially in the years that I've been living in Singapore, I have felt this keenly, and I'm always reminded of how many of us navigate the world that seems intent on letting us know our place, that is, our identity as other. For many forms here in Singapore that asked me what race I belong to, I tick the box marked others. I'm not part of the academe. I did not study creative writing, where many writers are based in. And thus, I have little or no access to grants or programs to help me with my writing projects. I'm also queer and have been in a relationship with my partner for more than 10 years. But the essential fact of my life is not recognized by the laws of where I was born or where I currently live. To be othered is to know what it feels like, how to dwell in the margins. It is to be rendered invisible, even powerless. To be othered is to be an afterthought. And yet I also think about reclaiming otherness and how we can shift the dominant narrative and disrupt the power structure that exists in Philippine literature. I'm very encouraged by this event, so thank you to the organizers, which provides a space for discussion among diverse and even dissonant voices. I'm inspired by the poems of Relinda Española, who is part of this talk, and other Filipino domestic workers in Singapore and elsewhere. Poems that speak about their daily struggles as migrant workers. I applaud the anthology published by Gaudy Boy called Ulirat, Best Contemporary Stories in Translation from the Philippines, which features stories written in Aquianon, Cebuano, Filipino, Hiligaynon, Ilocano, Kinaraya, and Waray. I invite readers and writers to question and challenge their prevailing perceptions about Philippine literature. Should the state of Philippine literature be defined by one senior writer? Must a literary work be decorated with an award, or must it be published in an officially sanctioned journal or magazine? Or is it possible that there are other voices in Philippine literature, voices that we might not have even heard of, perhaps written in languages other than English or Tagalog? Is it possible that Philippine literature is also written by a maid in Hong Kong or by someone who works in an offshore drilling rig at the Persian Gulf? I know some of them. Is it possible that Philippine literature can be more diverse and inclusive, more complex and nuanced than how it is portrayed on Facebook or in broadsheet columns? I'd like to end by saying that we have to actively consider these possibilities for Philippine literature to be polyphonic and multivalent. We need to imagine and embody otherness in Philippine literature if we are really going to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. Wonderful na. I kahit hindi pa tayo dun, pero parang, ayun na, I know you must, some of the participants here might have some responses also or want to, siguro engage. And siguro, pwedeng sa chat, no, habang nandito pa si Igor, you can message him privately too, or you can send it through the chat for everyone. So I guess that's my way also of encouraging you na I'm pretty sure yung mga nagsalita na kanina, no, about trauma, you might want to parang also share or either really talk about the points that were discussed, and just use the chat box para you can still have a conversation with them. Kasi syempre ayaw natin nga ng meron lang isang nagsasalita or may talking head, and we want to have an actual conversation na might not happen until the Q&A, but baka kasi makalimutan yung question or baka makalimutan yung point. So please feel free to use the chat box to do that. But thank you again, Igor. At this point, I think last na yung si Ned for this category. I'm not sure though kung nandito na si Aliana Sarino. Are you already here? Si Liza sana yung ating youngest participant, but I think parang wala pa siya. So siguro babalikan na natin siya kung sakaling dumating. But now we'll move on to the next, and I'll just introduce the next category. Category 2, ito yung, literary activism, political writing, self-representation, and the ethical search for social and economic justice. And this will be moderated by Joanna Cruz. Thank you.
Thank you, Vix. I did register for this event to try out the Google form, and I did also register in category 2 because it's something that I feel myself quite concerned about in terms of how I can, as a writer, be probably more relevant, no, in terms of the search for social and economic justice. Is there really space for a writer's activities, particularly for myself as a lesbian writer, to engage with what's happening in society? It's is our and the fact that I'm also an academic. I mean, does that make me kind of irrelevant or insignificant to the struggle to free our country from oppression? So I am so interested to hear what the speakers for this category will share with us today. So as we mentioned, we're just going in the order of how the names appear in the PDF that was distributed. So let's begin with RJ Viray, who I personally know. He used to be from Davao, or he lived in Davao for a while. RJ?
Hi, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. So, I'll start off by saying, well, parang dalawang guiding principles yung magiging guide nitong sasabihin ko. So first, I always push back. So I love to fight, not just artistically, pero literally. Kasi when I was in Baguio, after Davao, na-mention ni Ma'am Jo, I went to Baguio. So stay also Baguio for how many years? And I was part of the Team Tribal Torogi, used to be Tribal Submission. So literally, I fight. Siguro dun galing kung bakit din may talim at may angas always when writing. So that's one. And then the next would be skill sets are transferable. So when I was writing nung nasa Davao, yun yung pinaka-active na years ko. Na-enhance din yung pagiging musician ko. So it helped na I was involved with literature, natulungan yung pagiging musician ko. So these are the things. So obviously, nagre-resonate din sa akin yung category 4. These are the things na mga madadaanan ko. So first of all, working now in a government school for young artists, Philippine High School for the Arts. So actually, student namin si Aliana. Hinahanap ko rin siya. So yeah. And always, when you're in a government school, regardless if it's a regular public school or special schools, gaya nito, laging nandun yung social and economic injustices. So, okay yun ang silipin, and I would love to hear more about the topic. I've heard people said na yung ginagawa ko ngayon is career suicide. Kasi nawala yung connection mo, nawalan ka ng linkage dun sa mga matataas na tao who would probably hire you. So, gusto ko ring ma-touch and gusto ko ring makarinig on the politics ng arts in general. Although specifically, I'm in the performing arts, so salita ko about doon briefly. Fan ako as a conductor, choir conducting ang area ko sa music. Fan ako ng practitioners of specific areas or profession who also happen to practice something artistic. So sa writers, ang dami na. Actually, sa maraming art fields naman, laging may ganun. So sa mga conductors, ganun din. Gusto ko yung mga ganong narrative na conductor sila ngayon, pero actually galing sila somewhere. Galing sila sa ibang perspective. Kasi nag-offer sila ng something new. And it's the same sa pagsusulat. No? Yung sinabi ko kanina na friends, na sinasabi sa akin career suicide, problem namin lagi yung relationship ko with members. Masyado daw akong close, masyadong walang distance. Hindi ako sang-ayon eh. Ba't kailangan gawin yon? Ba't kailangan distansya ang sarili? Bakit kailangan may hierarchy? So yung mindset and thinking na as conductor, you're up there. Hindi ka dapat makikimingle dun sa mas mababa sa iyo. Na magli-lead sa akin dun sa pagiging teacher. So ganun din sa mga students. Lagi akong nare-remind to keep your distance, wag ganon with the students. Pero maintindihan nyo siguro na with the setup ng Philippine High School for the Arts where you live with the students, importante yung pagiging, ito literal, na second parent ako ng mga bata. So ito yung mga nilalabanan ko within the school system. Aside from the usual, yung faulty na ranking system, yung hire and fire system ng DepEd, hindi ako regular public school eh. Although government school din, pero dahil hindi ako regular public school, kaya kong magsalita against them. May napapalagan ko sila. And lastly, since nagsusulat ako for textbook, na-realize ko ngayon yung politics ng textbook publishing. At ngayon, nag-sink in sa akin bakit sa mga workshops naman laging ini-encourage ang self-publishing. So, gusto ko pang makarinig more about these topics. Having all that, to wrap up, nasa harap ko na ngayon. So, sobrang dami palang kailangan isulat at kailangan magsulat. So, yun lang po. Maraming salamat and hope to hear more about it. Thank you po.
Salamat, RJ. Natutuwa ako na nakadalo ka dito today, no? Kasi maganda yung representation na hindi lang writer, musician din, tapos hindi lang musician, administrator din, no? So magandang pag-usapan yung pagkakakawing-kawing ng tatlong identidad na yon. No? So pwede pa sigurong i-discuss mamaya kung may iba rito na interesado doon. Although iniisip ko yung career suicide na kasi parang mas marami kang opportunities ngayon, no? In your position in the Makiling High School for the Arts to contribute to the community. But maybe you can talk about it in greater detail later. Thanks, RJ. The next one in the list is Darren Bendanillo, but I don't think he's here. I don't see him yet in the list of participants, so maybe later. Next is a familiar name to those of us in Mindanao, Lina Sagaral Reyes. Currently based in Cagayan de Oro. Lina?
If I can use my computer instead of the laptop, or instead of the phone. Okay, I'll be back later.
Sige, I'll ask the next person first. Sige. Yeah, we cannot take it for granted no, na dito sa Mindanao mahina ang signal talaga. So, can we call on Steno Padilla while we're waiting for Lina to get the her connection in a better place? Steno, I also know personally, not personally, but online. But if you follow him on Facebook, you know that he's a fierce young writer. So go ahead, Steno.
Thank you, Joanna. Sana magkita tayo soon in person. Hello, can everybody hear me? Ang dami kong gustong sabihin sa topic na ito, no? Pero susubukan kong sabihin lahat sa loob ng 5 minuto. Gusto kong magsimula sa isang quote galing kay Albert Camus. Sabi niya, the artists who preceded us had doubts, but what they doubted was their own talent. Artists of today doubt whether their art and therefore their very existence is necessary. So basically, it's an existential crisis, no, as an artist. Kung tinatanong niya kung ano ang saysay at ang kabuluhan ng ating mga nililikha, ng ating mga sinusulat sa ating mundong ginagalawan. Pero bago ko siguro subukan o tangkaing sagutin yung krisis na iyon, gusto ko munang sabihin yung pinanggagalingan ko bilang isang manunulat. Tulad ni Ma'am Lina, isa akong practicing journalist at nagsusulat din ng nobela at paminsan-minsan mga konting tula. Bilang isang journalist, nagsimula ako noong taong 2004 sa UP. Ito yung kapanahunan ni GMA, ni Arroyo, na yung mga periodista sa Pilipinas, sa bansa ay pinapatay, no? Halos linggo-linggo o buwan-buwan may napapabalitang pinapatay na mga journalist. So nung high school ako, sabi ko, biro ko sarili ko, pag tinatanong ako ng mga tao, bakit journalism ang kinuha mo? Para kakapandagdag sa supply ng mga namamatay na journalist. Pero ang totoo, kasi gusto kong isiwalat yung katotohanan na kahit mismo mga kamag-anak ko ay hindi nakikita, no? Kahit araw-araw silang nanonood ng balita. So yun din yung isang dahilan na naisip ko, okay, journalist na ako, nagsusulat ako ng totoo, ng facts, pero parang may kulang pa rin. Hindi ko pa rin sa katuparan yung mga bagay na gusto kong mangyari kahit man lang dito sa mundong ginagalawan ko, hindi man sa buong bansa, pero dito sa loob ng bahay. Parang truth is important pero parang it's not enough or nakukulangan yung delivery siguro. So, isa yun sa mga dahilan kung bakit pumasok na rin ako sa pagsusulat ng fiction. Another one, I'm also a homosexual man. So, isa yun sa mga dahilan kung bakit pumasok ako sa pagsulat ng fiction. Kasi noong teenage years o noong early 20s, dumating sa punto na wala akong mabasang nobela na ang bida ay bakla. Kung meron man na tauhang bakla sa isang kwento, sidekick siya, supporting character, o yung comic relief, yung tampulan ng joke. Siya yung taga sabi ng mga punchline. Sabi ko, hindi ito yung gusto kong representation ng mga bakla, kundi man sa media, sa mga nababasa kong akda. So doon ako nagsimulang magsulat ng mga nobela na gusto ko ring basahin bilang isang gay. At nakuha ko yung validation na yon noong ipinasa ko yung isa kong nobela sa Patimpalak ng Lampara. So nanalo siya. So sabi ko, Okay. So, may market para sa ganito. At the fact na nanalo siya, ibig sabihin, nagustuhan ng 3 judges at baka nga, ito yung kulang para makuha ko sa sarili ko kung ano man yung gusto kong mangyari sa mundong ginagalawan ko. So, nandun na ako sa puntong yon, pero parang may kulang pa rin, no? Tinatanong ko pa rin sa sarili ko, parang ano pa ang maaari kong magawa bilang isang journalist at bilang isang nobelista para una, madagdagan yung representation ng mga tulad ko sa media at sa literature locally. Kasi sa ibang bansa naman, merong mga LGBT literature na mas mayabong kumpara dito sa atin. At maliban doon, nagtangka rin akong pasukan ng iba pang mga gusto kong ipaglaban, no? Maliban sa self-representation. Dahil nga journalist ako, araw-araw akong exposed sa mga balita, lalo na ngayon sa rehimen ni Duterte, parang ano pa ang pwede kong magawa? Ay, time's up na. Sige, sa open forum na lang. Maraming salamat po sa pakikinig.
Ay, salamat, Steno. Pasensya na kasi we're pressed for time. But maganda naman yung ending kasi yung tanong mo na ano pa ang pwede mong magawa. Actually, saludo ako sa iyo kasi ang bata mo nagsimula bilang journalist at ibang klaseng tapang talaga yung kailangan doon sa palagay ko. Dahil nga doon sa pinapatay ang journalist sa Pilipinas. Tapos yung transition, interesado ako doon sa transition mo sa nobela, doon sa sinasabi mong kulang pa. So maganda ngang siguro mamaya sa open forum, pwede pang i-discuss yun for those with similar concerns. Thank you, Steno. Ang susunod sa listahan ko, si Luchi Maranan. Matagal ko ng kaibigan sa Baguio. Aktivista, isa sa mga early, very strong influences on my political development. Luchi?
Naku naman, salamat kung ako'y may impact sa iyong buhay. Actually, nung una, gusto ko mag-register as observer. Pero naghahanap din ako ng kausap bilang manunulat. I think dito sa nangyaring itong phenomenon ng pandemic, nagkaroon ng bakod ang aktivista at ang manunulat. Well, unang-una, wala akong inihanda na babasahin. Gusto ko lang mag-share na ang isang senior citizen na aktivista, na manunulat, na marami ng mga administrasyon ang dinaanan at nilabanan, na wala pa rin nakikitang, alam mo yun, yung malaking igpaw. No matter what you've written, what you've done as an organizer in many fields, no? Parang I am close to being a cynical writer, losing my idealism, pero at the same time, yung bang yung alam mong role, no, ng isang manunulat na hindi ka dapat mawala ng gasolina, kumbaga. The creative juices should not dry up because there will always be material or the situation, the condition that will propel you to write. Pero ngayon, ang parang, kuminsan parang soliloquy yan eh. Yung react ka ng react sa mga nangyayari, no? To the political situation. And then you write them down. And then you publish. I mean, you go out into the public, post your work, and then you don't know if it's even making a dent Kasi ano parang wow putya mas malaki ang mas malaki ang reaction ng mga DDS, 'di ba? Parang may pag-asa pa ba tong mga itong mga resisting writers sa ganitong lockdown, terror bill and all this? Tapos parang ang feeling mo, well, at least in my position being here in Baguio, which is a very laid back city dahil maginawang klima, ironically, it's also a creative city, pero hindi ko makita yung dynamism, no? Yung fire ng indignance siguro ng mga tao, especially among writers, na may pakialam ba tayo talaga sa nangyayari? Kuminsan, yun nga, parang inaabutan ka ng fatigue. Pero sana wag. So, nagkakaroon ako ng conversation with myself as a writer, as an activist, na hindi ka naman pwedeng sumama ngayon sa mga rally kasi may mga health protocol, no? You cannot be part of conceptualizing protest action, creative forms of protest. Ano bang pwede nating except through webinars and Zoom like this. Pero kasi I think yung writer to be really effective and makapture mo yung nangyayari, you have to understand the actual situation and be with the people in the thick of action. And yet, ito na nga ang sitwasyon natin ngayon, no? Meron talagang physical limitation. So I look for people, for kindred spirits na makakaintindi na hindi dapat mapagod, hindi dapat madismaya. Ganyan. I look forward to listening similar sana. I'm hoping there will be similar sentiments like what I've expressed, and people who will tell me na meron tayong naaabot through our writings. Thank you.
Salamat, Lucy. I don't know that I can assure you or reassure you na may impact nga ang ginagawa natin kasi tanong ko din yan sa sarili ko. Bukod sa, di ba, yung mga nagva-viral, yung mga walang kakwenta-kwentang mga bagay. So, tingnan natin, no, kung, like we always say, history will judge us, all of us. Thank you, Lucy. So, of course, may open forum pa mamaya para sa mga interesado din sa topic na yan. The next one, is Lina Reyes back?
Hi.
Si Dino. Hello, Dino. Nice to meet you. Sa Twitter ko lang ikaw nakikita. Pero it's nice to see you. And we're glad that you joined us so that you can make a bus here.
Yung ebas na, sorry. May message ako ni Vix about that. Tapos sorry. Ano lang yun, parang kasi gusto ko lang pagtripan dun sarili ko kasi sorry. Pero it was sorry. But anyway, I hope na thank you for
Don't say sorry. It's just bagong word para sa akin. Kaya ako siya ano ba yung ebasan? So baka gusto mong ipaliwanag. Pero don't say sorry, please. Go ahead, Dino.
Magsasalita lang, yun lang. Parang just to let some stuff out. So sabi-sabi lang ganyan. So but of course, it's we all have our different ways of praxis. So ang natutuwa lang ako, kaya ko rin sinabing ebas kasi of course na pag ina-assess ko rin sarili ko, parang wow, ang dami kong sinasabi tapos yun kaya ko ba itong panindigan? The usual, am I really the writer that I want to be, or parang that are the things that I'm writing about or talking about, can I even practice them? So yun lang, ayun yung start. Babasahin ko na lang din yung, kasi madaldal akong tao, so babasahin ko na lang tong sinulat ko para siguradong hindi ako masyadong ma-waylay. So we writers are often placed at a crucible when someone, a friend or family or a troll arguing with us on Facebook asks, what change are we affecting with our writing? My long and short answer to that is that writers change things by imagining things. over the past decades, many would say centuries, imagination has been under attack. There's the hardline rejection of imagination by using or by saying you're imagining things or you're on drugs. Then there's the moderate rejection of imagination, yung let's be realistic, ganyan, or that won't work in the real world, ganyan. But what they're really saying is that let's be realistic. There are evil persons abound. Let's be realistic, there are greedy capitalists. Let's be realistic, there are oppressive presidents, senators, etc. So for them, that becomes unrealistic. But I think it's just the core of it is that they couldn't imagine a world without oppressive presidents, oppressive senators, political dynasties, capitalists, etc., etc. So as writers and activists, I think our role is to imagine that and to word it out, articulate on them. My siblings, I have 5 and 2 in-laws, are successful professionals. An architect, a teacher, 3 doctors, a lawyer, and an industrial designer. And they're intelligent people. But funneled into their professions and practices, their imaginations may have to operate within their bounds to function the way they are expected to. They might not have the time to think about other possibilities. They have been pushed to think that imagination is just not their field or is just not their currency. We often argue about things they find hard to imagine. Standing up to their bosses, fighting beside the poor, calling out figures of authority like priests or our elders, not earning so much money, gender politics, toppling dictators and redressing governments, etc., etc. I assess this to be a shortage in their imaginations. They find it hard to imagine a different order. I think as writers and activists, that's our fertile ground. Imagining what happens if and what happens next. And that's why it is important for us to keep researching history, particularly the people on the ground, particularly people outside our middle and upper class comfort zones, those who would not be written about so much in newspapers and websites, voices who need amplification. We need to research these in books, in the streets, because that's how we keep our imaginations muscular, in quotation marks. If what is imagined becomes clearer and more vivid and more honest and persistent and braver than our dreams, then it just might be worth gunning for. Now, I know I write columns and essays, creative nonfiction, if we should call it that. And people would often say, stick to the truth or hard facts, as if these truths and hard facts were mutually exclusive to having opinions. As if truths and hard facts weren't first imagined. But for me, imagination in columns and essays takes the form of making connections. Imagination takes the form of putting forward alternatives and redirecting focuses and attentions. Imagination comes in the form of holding a hand out in solidarity with a certain minority. Does this open more opportunities for me as a writer? Not really sure. But the imagining in itself, I think, is an opportunity open. A sort of door leading to more doors as more people are hoped to align with a certain line of imagination. I don't want to say my line of imagination. What is ownership anyway? But a way of seeing the world. So I'll end with David Graeber. He said that the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something we make and could just as easily make differently. So thank you. That's all.
Ang ganda, Dino. Salamat. I think a lot of us will resonate with that idea that it is our job as artists and writers to create the new world that we are imagining for ourselves and in solidarity with other communities. Ganda. So, babalikan natin mamaya yan sa open forum. Kung pwede na si Lina. Lina Reyes is also a journalist, no? So talagang lahat tayo magkakaugnay somehow. Actually, I used to have a column myself in the Mindanao Times, but I don't see myself as a journalist. So I don't know if Dino feels the same way. Kasi para sa akin, iba yung trabaho ng journalist. Really putting yourselves on the line to follow the news, where the news is.
Team, yeah. Mamaya siguro.
Mamaya. Mamaya.
Journalist
So,
versus yung creation nila ng ganong categories. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So don't see it as a binary.
Yeah, I don't see it as a binary.
So yeah, magandang pag-usapan din mamaya. So baka mawala yung aking agam-agam pag naipaliwanag mo na. So mukhang wala na I don't see Lina in the group. So maybe when she has a better connection, she can speak later. But that's the last, Dino's the last speaker now for category 2. So I'd like to turn it over to the moderator of category 3. Our moderator for category 3 is Bri Posmilio of the University of New England and the Queer Southeast Asia Journal. Bri?
Hello, thank you. I think that's usually the. Before I begin, I just like to thank all of you for spending your time with each other in this meeting. Creative writing is such a solitary practice, and there are so many difficult issues, like the issues that we have heard thus far: trauma, writing about trauma, literary activism. These things are very difficult to navigate when you're alone. And I think this is a beautiful opportunity for us to experience, to confront and approach these issues with other people, that sense of togetherness. I think sometimes that helps. The category that we're going to talk about is the Filipino author as borderless immigrant experiences published elsewhere, writing outside through scarcities of home. I think Rodrigo de la Peña, I don't know if he's still here, but I think he began this category with really solid ideas, the idea of one otherness that not only emphasizes your difference, but also it articulates a sense of exclusion. And the other thing that he pointed out was that it sort of reflects to the kind of literature and literary tradition that we have in the Philippines, the need to have a more sort of nuanced sense of diversity. And also, perhaps it also reflects on the kind of publications that we have in the Philippines, that sense of diversity. So I'd like to call on Alan Carino to begin this category. Is he here? Alan?
Hi, yeah. I didn't expect to be the first in this category. So I wanted to join this category because, as you can hear, I grew up in the UK, and then I'm half Ibeloy, and I'm based in Baguio now. So I'm a poet and a teacher, and so I wanted to join this category as well to add the perspective that the inevitable result of the diaspora is that it will not just be out there, right? It just won't, it will also write back, come home, or their children, like me, will write back and come home. And that's also a situation that's rife with its own challenges and inequalities of power and social capital and things like that. So access to international spaces and things. So I'll try and answer some of the questions that were asked. In terms of relating to the Philippines when I'm not there, how does it inform your writing? I think the question of relation is like really one of the biggest challenges, because you are bringing things into relation if you're writing in the Philippines and grew up elsewhere, or are out of the Philippines and are writing about the Philippines. So it's how do you it takes an ego, I guess. It's like how do you have the belief in yourself capable of being the bridge, even if that's something that you frequently doubt. What else? I see nostalgia as something to guard against a bit in terms of writing about the Philippines when I wasn't in the Philippines, or about the UK when I'm not in the UK. Because I've got a line in one of my poems that dreams can wear down a thing until it's round like a pebble on a beach, right? It can take the edges off. And so I think nostalgia is something that many people want, and audience do performance poetry as well. Audience or readers might want, but how do you avoid depicting an imaginary image of the place that is nostalgia or even inherited nostalgia, without it being simplifying or too idealized or misrepresentative? How do you carry a world with you without wearing it smooth in your head, right? So you don't want to lose what's distinct and sharp and lived experiences of it. And I also wanted to say that I think it's not only a question in relation to the nation you're in. So I think a lot of writers grapple with that worry that you're going to smooth material condition, or other writers that I talk to in our writers groups here. Nostalgia is something that the Cordillera really grapples with, right? How do you contend with it with imaginary images of places without letting them be flattening or simplifying, or it's difficult to escape in your art or your writing or your aesthetics as a Cordy writer as well, right? Because there's a market and there's a flood of such images of nostalgia and particular associated aesthetics. I'll skip ahead so I'm not taking too much time. How does your position as a Filipino writer prove beneficial or limiting in an international publishing context? So I've been published in the UK in journals and magazines and things, and in the Philippines. I think, how does my position, I think the answer to that is, the thing that I really related to was the idea of there is both an increasingly inclusive, or a market for inclusivity, that's also vulnerable to fetishizing that inclusivity. So, and I think one thing that I've gotten used to as a diaspora, writing in diaspora and writing then in the Philippines, is you have to become very familiar with and challenge yourself on how much questions of authenticity and representation are constantly placed on you. Like that it's an anxiety or a responsibility that you should authentically represent something. And I think it becomes a challenge because you realize how radically those concepts shift from space to space that you occupy. So absolutely, when I was growing up at school in the UK or at university in the UK, there would be rooms where unquestionably I would be the indigenous representation and the authentically other like that. But I think you have to carry that lightly and don't integrate that extreme feeling of being othered to believe that you always carry that in all spaces, because in spaces here in the Philippines, in the Cordillera, then it's simply not the case. Like, it's impossible that I would be correctly read as being authentically representative in my own experiences of life and language and art as when there's so many other people in the rooms that are also representative, right?
Alan, I'm sorry, I'm giving you last 30 seconds.
Oh, okay, sorry. And finally, I just wanted to mention that there's similarities between, I think, this diaspora experience and experiences that exist within the nation. So because the Philippines is a country of many people and languages, it creates diaspora experiences within the country as well. So Baguio has diaspora experiences for the surrounding provinces. And so I think that's something that, and then we have diaspora experiences and anxieties in relation to Manila. So I think that's also a way that the home ground or the ground here can be related to these diaspora writers.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. Maybe perhaps most probably we can talk about more about that later in the discussion.
Yep.
But we have to move on with Nash Tismans. Are you here? Nash is not here. How about Naomi Cerise Camayo? I saw her earlier.
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Yeah. Hi. Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And may begin.
Yeah. I'm ngayon na lang ako ulit nagsasalita sa harap ng iba pang mga fellow academics sa Pinas. And yun nga, gaya din ng sinabi ng isang speaker, yun din, in some way, naghahanap din ako ng kausap about my experience. Like, hindi naman ako immigrant dito. Pero I chose to study far from Manila kasi ito talaga yung para po. Very selfish, very privileged. And I think, and yun yung parang na-realize ko din. And aside from the fact that I'm also a queer writer and someone din na medyo withdrawn lang din sa academic and writing community in the Philippines. Dito ako medyo mas nagtatry na to get my whatever I have to say out there, which is of course about the Philippine lesbian experience. So yun. So try ko na lang ding sagutin yung mga tanong. Gaya ng sinabi nung previous speaker about nostalgia, I think para sa akin, parang hindi rin ako nagbabank on that with the current way that I am writing. It's more of nagsinusubukan kong magsulat kung ano yung current realities natin sa Pilipinas. Pero minsan na-feel ko din na para ang pretentious ko ba o sinusubukan ko lang. And at some point sa writing experience ko from here, para lalo na sa panahon ng pandemya, parang may point pa ba tong lahat? Parang dumating na dun sa point na ganun. And yun nga when I came into my program, I wanted to bring hindi lang visibility din sa Filipino lesbian writers, especially poets, but at the same time shed light on other lesbian identities, hindi lang yung mga nakapag-aral. Kasi inaaral ko rin yung poetry ni Faye Kuray at saka ni Aida Santos, ganyan. Yung ngayon ko lang sa buhay ko nakikilalanin yung mga ibang lesbiana na nandun din somehow sa konteksto ko ng pagiging Pilipina. Kasi pretentious ako eh. Pretentious ako na nagbabasa ng mga white lesbian writers. Aminado ako. Aminin natin yan. So, ngayon lang din ako na-enlighten about decolonization and ayun. Tapos, kasalanan to ng Quill eh. De, joke lang. Hi, Mark. pero yun, pero yun din. And then, swerte din siguro ako na yung writing community din dito, hindi naman din ako ine-exoticize or hindi pa naman ako nakakaranas ng racism or parang novelty yung pagsusulat ko, which is ang weird kasi sa ibang yung experience ng ibang writers of color dito ganun. Pero very welcoming naman yung community nila. And I dare to say even more welcoming than some writing communities back home. Pero alam mo yun, ang dami ko na talaga halo-halo. So ang weird talaga nung experience ko na writing away from the context. And dito pa ako mas naging interesado kung ano nga ba yung nangyayari sa Pilipinas. Ano ba yung nangyayari doon sa mga taong hindi ako. And then idagdag mo pa yung layer ng pagiging lesbiana. Tapos idagdag mo pa yung layer ng pandemic na parang ako feeling ko hirap na ako dito pero wala akong karapatan na isipin yon. And then yun yung parang tinatry kong i-process sa writing ko aside from vis-a-vis yung talagang research ko dito. So I guess yun. And then yun nga, nakakatawa pero parang strange that in the Philippine context, parang privileged ka. Pero pagdating mo dito, hindi kasi ako scholar eh. So nagtatrabaho din ako and yung parang, ewan ko kung maiirita kayo na sasabihin ko. Minsan hindi ko na alam, parang may kikitain pa ba ako bukas, may pambayad pa ba ako ng rent bukas. Yung ganun, biglang dito, ganun. Samantalang sa Pilipinas, parang I feel that I'm taken care of. Parang ganun. So, nagiging totoo lang ako dun sa experience ko and kung paano ko to ipaprocess and how I can, how the way I'm writing can also speak to other writers or other identities na wala sa konteksto nila. So ayun lang. And, ano pa ba? Ayun. Yun lang. Thank you for inviting me. Sana I made sense.
Thank you, Neo. Thank you.
All right. Maraming salamat, Bri. Can everyone hear me? Am I audible? Sure. All right. Thank you. I'm hoping that we can actually talk about a whole lot of the other issues that were raised throughout the this event so far later in the open forum. Ang daming potentially interesting avenues for discussion na na-raised na. I mean, like right off the bat, ang daming na-mention ni Naomi, for example, na pwedeng pag-usapan, right? Even if the discussions at some point become pretty much just an airing out of anxieties, which I guess we all share when it comes to not just writing, but also about the kind of context that we're in at the moment, right? I don't know why I'm saying that, but I'm saying that also maybe as a way of leading to the last category for this event, category 4, which actually presents issues related to literary production, also of distribution, like the kind of activities that exist not necessarily outside or not necessarily just outside, but also alongside the hegemony that is the academia. Ganyan. Before we get to the speakers, I'm actually going to be reading the questions again. Maybe these are things that you may want to mull over on your own too, for those who are observing this event, just so maybe you can talk about any of them later during the open forum. But before we get to that, nandiyan ulit si Ma'am Dina. Pwede siya na ulit? Wait, what's going on?
I don't.
I
Still
it
in
disappeared
the
again.
waiting room,
Yeah.
baka yung connection. But
Go ahead.
I have a request
Sure.
because one of your speakers, si Florene Pantaleta, has to leave for another meeting. So maybe you can let her go first.
Sure. All right. Yeah, we can hear from Florene right now.
Pero okay lang, you can siguro read muna the questions like you said.
All right.
You can, okay. Sige.
Sige.
Thank you, Ma'am Jo.
All right. Well, the title of the category is Against the Reproduction of Oppressive Powers Through Publications in Academic Institutions, Alternative Spaces, the Experimental and Grassroots Collectivities. The questions go, 1, how do conventions in Philippine writing constrain your creativity? 2, how do you process ideas from established Filipino authors and do these validate or invalidate your creative practice? 3, how do you negotiate with textual or verbal manifestations of support from other Filipino authors that either enrich or sustain fascist and authoritarian agenda? Okay. 4, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated a trend too of rendering our cultural lives in online platforms, which brings a different kind of vulnerability, especially when we talk or write about touchy subjects. What has been your experience of cyberbullying and online harassment? What is the role of writing communities in amplifying how the online platform as a tool of oppressive powers derides creative life? Fifth question, I think. How challenging is it for your creative practice to thrive in an extremely polarized environment? And last, how important is it for you to work with other writers? All right, let's hear from Florene. Maraming salamat, Florene.
Okay, thank you. So, for may sinulat talaga ako for this. Ay, klaro lang ba yung yung voice ko? Klaro lang. Okay, thank you. So, magandang hapon po sa lahat. For my time, I would like to share some thoughts on alternative spaces, which in my mind are not necessarily carved in juxtaposition to a mainstream, institutionalized, or customary, but are reconfigurations or even a blurring of lines, a reframing, a reclaiming of spaces as we all partake in the finite of material reality. I am taking inspiration from thinkers in geography, socio, and linguistics. So the COVID-19 pandemic has amplified issues of human encroachment into wildlife and the environment. These encroachments, which have led to the displacement of animals from their habitats, the widespread destruction of forests, mountains, oceans, all made possible by the unrelenting rape of the neoliberal machinery, has called to mind an image of a map that is laid out in front of men in black suit and tie, who are proposed to by governments asking which red dot is next. But this is not just a setting down of pins, but the creation of folds, a crumpling, if you will. The map grows smaller and the world almost fits into one clenched fist. We know the perils of clenched fists. This crumpling is especially important because it insists that the world is supposed to fold in one direction towards a center, wherever the seat of power is, a power that wants to consolidate more power into itself, into a few. Doreen Massey wanted to rethink space not as something of lesser importance to time, but as that dimension in which power relations are more prominently divulged. In her theoretical and political rethinking of space, she defines it as the site of simultaneity and multiplicity that presents us with the existence of others and in which distinct trajectories coexist. A sphere of coexisting heterogeneity, Massey says that while attempts to convert contemporaneous difference among different spaces into a single temporal reality, space insists on different paths towards the future, different possibilities of alternatives. She explains how terminologies, for example, like developed countries and developing countries, unnecessarily puts all nation states into one singular linear path. For Massey, this, in a sense, denies the simultaneity, the multiplicity of space, and are turning all those differences into a single historical trajectory. In linguistics, Elizabeth Keating also says that language is central to how you imagine and construct space and social relations within it. She writes, and I quote, "Space is used throughout societies worldwide to maintain and legitimize arbitrary social distinctions that are not intrinsically spatial, but that gain solidarity or to meet compliance when expressed through physical space. Because space is discursively constructed and it can always be remade, reconstructed, made invisible, denied, diminished. Edward Said also has this term in his book called Culture and Imperialism. He also used the terms fundamentally opposed histories. So I come from Mindanao, where these things are always in my mind. I've been thinking about this, especially with many issues on ancestral domain, etc. So, but to me, Said is referring to the struggle against the erasure of languages, narratives, voices, as well as their continued growth and reproduction by a system that believes that the dispersal of thought and imagination can only be sourced from only one or a few sites. And I feel this and I feel these differences in time and space when I, for example, think about how languages are strained towards written expression and documentation even as they thrive in orality and song, especially when a literature is called quote unquote underdeveloped or worse, non-existent, even as they continually take new shapes or new forms far from the ones we can genealogically identify to be literature according to what we have studied from universities. I think of these in the context of Basilan and Zamboanga, where it is difficult to assert the importance and urgency of a kind of literature that is written in the two most widely circulated languages from the same points of dispersal that are neither of the languages of our people. And yet we are so used to national agencies in basic and higher education, implementing blanket policies, forgetting that there are great disparities in the needs and capacities among different localities. This is similar to when we demand that to be able to hold a Tausug or Yakan or Sinama or Ilanon workshop, there must be at least one established or published writer who can sit as a panelist. The workshop model itself poses many questions, but to my mind, even the requirement of an English or Filipino translation still skews in favor of both these languages. Of greater circulation, even as translation poses many gains as well. How then do we carve a space for these languages to induce participation and commitment to cultivate interest and readership if these parameters that come from the mainstream, customary, and institutionalized ways of doing things are fixed in place? How do we create entryways and empowerment for languages, writers, and readers operating in asymmetrical but coexisting realities? And this is not just about censorship or thematic considerations in senior high school textbooks or proposal requirements. There are very few people who can fall under the category of established or published writers to be readers, judges, or panelists for my language. For many reasons, many of the older generation of writers have already crossed worlds. Others are not based in the locality anymore, and there is a great disparity in the language the elders used to the registers being used today by those in the locality. Does this mean that there is no standard by which we can judge literary merit in the language or appraise the quality of works for publication? Instead of thinking about literary merit or making merit the birthing point, I would like to take from the point of view of language revitalization that there must be a raising of interest in the use of language for literary production. Participation must be democratized in a community of and a community of readers must be nurtured through stimulating linguistic exchange. I'm also thinking about how our filmmakers in Mindanao also have programs for audience development, as they have termed it. So this is best realized through different forms of community involvement, the building of bridges and breaking of walls, so to speak. Think direct collaborations among writers and educational institutions in the production of materials such as big books and literature textbooks. I have always dreamed of doing this in Basilan, where there is a dearth of materials in the local languages to be used in the classrooms. These could also be aided by the holding of literary readings and storytelling sessions in schools with children who are learning to read and who might have tons of questions about the stories. These kids might be more interested to read because of these engagements. There could also be workshops for teachers and students as well as other sectors of the community. Daloy comes to mind, a zine collection of works of Filipino migrant women of Batis Aware, a non-profit organization of Filipino migrant women from Asia, the Middle East, and all over the world. Here, I propose that literature is not just what we publish or what we win awards for. It is also what makes our communities come together, what allows us to fill in the space of language, in the spaces language and stories can fill in, even when oftentimes there is very little that language and writing can do. And here we can all find all sorts of reasons to be a writer and to write other than just prestige. Literature holds an immense capacity to cultivate interest for history and culture in the community. We just have to map the ways literature overlaps with anthropology, history, politics, for example, to be writers and be writers, researchers. We can document knowledge, restate facts, corroborate history. We can examine new circuits of language and literature. The literary merit yardsticks will come eventually when there are already bodies of work. And these yardsticks, yes?
Wrap up. Yeah, wrap up na lang. Yeah.
Oh, sige, lapit na. Sorry. And these yardsticks are to be set by the communities themselves and not outsourced from an arbiter from outside the cultures. The community's literature is nevertheless cultivated by ongoing production and exchange with other literatures in the country. After all, we are a multiplicity of languages. This is how, to me, we make room for different forms of writing, for the experimental, for creative practices rooted in the localities. So empowered languages and literatures can only come from empowered communities who wield the capacity to decide the shape of their literary production. We cannot raise the flag of representation without truly allowing another group of people to come forward and decide to carve their languages in sand or in stone. We must cultivate the mutuality of exchange among cultures, sharpen our multilingualism, restructure to allow for greater linguistic multiplicity, so there will be no crumpling of maps, no clenching of fists, no assigning of silences to languages that have long been speaking. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Lorraine. Gusto kong isipin na maybe sa open forum later, we know that in terms of the people who are here, marami rin from, like, I think a lot of writers who are in this event actually write or live or have collaborations or have organizations or have collectives outside Manila. And sobrang mahalaga yung diniscuss ni Florine kasi like it's the threat of cultural erasure that needs to be mitigated, right? And like Florine not just talks about, I guess, alternative spaces, but also like changes that actually need to be carved within institutions, because it's a much greater problem than like getting your work out there, right? So parang I'm hoping it's something that you can maybe discuss at length, more deliberately later on in the open forum, considering that there are other like collectives here that maybe can talk about the initiatives they've done from where they are actually, right? But you're not gonna stick around, no, Florine? Okay, sayang. Pero maraming salamat.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Ang susunod na speaker natin for category 4 is RB Abiva. Sa lahat ng speakers dito, baka pwedeng maybe like give us a sentence or two that can maybe talk about where you are if you're part of a particular collective. Kasi I think this category really is tethered to local efforts, right? Thank you. RB, are you here?
Yes. Okay, naririnig ba ako?
Yes, perfectly.
Ayun, maraming salamat. Parang yun, din ako magbabahagi ng sa theoretical, mas yung kasalukuyang proyekto ko ngayon, particular, yung parmatan. Sa amin kasi sa mga Ilocano, I'm representing Dumil Filipinas, no? Yung oldest Ilocano Writers Association dito sa Pilipinas. And itong parmata ay signos. Kasi batay doon sa discussion ni Lorraine, for sa akin personally, malaking problema itong convention, yung pagkakaroon ng sentro, yung centralism sa pagdating sa literatura. Sapagkat idinidikta ng sentro yung kung ano yung aesthetically, kung ano yung katanggap-tanggap maging sa pamantayan ng kasalukuyang konbensyon, or itinatakda rin kasi nito kung ano yung katanggap-tanggap maging sa hangin ng mga mambabasa, which is ito yung malaking problema. Ang pinapatay talaga nito ng konbensyon ay itong mga regional at mga sub-regional na mga sabihin natin language or languages, including literature. Yung unti-unting pagkawasak o paglaho ng oral literature, particularly, isa yon sa mga suliranin na kinakaharap ngayon, lalo na sa mga liblib na bahagi ng Pilipinas. At dito marahil papasok yung binabanggit ko kanina na kung pinoproblema ng mga Tagalog yung kanilang standardisasyon sa wika, pinoproblema rin naman ng mga Ilocano yung standardisasyon din sa wikang Ilocano, sapagkat nagbabanggaan din, kinakailangan ko na kahit sa literature o sa lingwahe may politika rin kasi.
Yeah.
At yung kanina, yung mga bagabagi hinggil sa hierarchy, pagkakahati-hati, division at iba pa, hanggat may convention kasi, merong ganyan. Kaya naniniwala ko doon sa sinasabi ni Albert Camus hinggil doon sa literary rebellion na binabanggit niya, na yung manunulat, bakit na kailangan din niyang tanungin. Hindi lamang siya lumilikha ng mga posibilidad, kundi tinatanong niya pangunahin yung kasalukuyan, kung meron pa bang posibilidad o wala na. So, lagi-lagi babangga ito sa convention. At yung usapin sa convention, kung ano ang dapat at hindi dapat, ay parang pagtanong din yan, or contradiction between man and God. So parang ganon. Then kung familiar kayo kay Ekidlat Tahimik, di ba meron siyang yung improvised video, yung subaltern video camera niya. Yung sa akin naman, kasi yung ginagawa ko, baka mas madaling maunawaan ng mga tao yung parmata na aking proyekto, it's a collection of prose. Baka mas madaling maunawaan ng mga tao kung ita-translate ko, isasalin yung text to wood carvings. Kaya si Parmata ay ito. Ito si Parmata. This is Apolaki. Si Apolaki yung indigenous god ng mga Pangasinense bago kami nasakop, or may Ilocano bago nasakop ng mga Spanish. Then this is the pwede natin sabihin replica or depiction ng the Jesus as the concrete symbolism of Christian faith. So ang ginagawa ni Apolaki, he's offering the head of this deity, or the representation of Yahweh's dominion over the earth. So inaalay ni Apolaki yung head ni Apolaki sa liberated masses. So ito yung one. Hindi pa tapos itong project na ito. So ito yung Parmata, ang signos ni coming resurrection of the savage people of Northern Luzon. Well, yun yung aking proyekto, no? Ano po yan?
Can you wrap up na? Yeah, sorry about this.
Okay. Well, generally, ito yung aking proyekto sa Parmata, or yung resurrection ng mga savage, sabi ng mga Westerners, savage people ng North Luzon. So, ito yung aking contribution doon sa anti-convention tradition pagdating sa literature and arts. Yun lamang at maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat, RB. Ang susunod na magsasalita ay si Austere Rex Gamao. Austere?
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm so nervous. Okay. So I guess the first question, parang, what was the first question? So how do conventions in Philippine writing constrain your creativity? So I'm in a MFA program sa LaSalle. So, there are expectations of writers kung ano yung dapat sulatin para makapasa. So sometimes, I try to think outside the box. Wow. But, I try to experiment. I don't want to repeat myself, and I try to change my language or change the forms. But nagiging problema siya for me kasi yung palaging comments ng mga professors ko is like, I didn't really understand it. Or like, oh yeah, it's you know, it's okay, but you need to have, you know, yung mga standards. So like, oh, where's the plot? Where are your characters? Like, oh, bakit parang like ang flimsy ng everything. But I guess ano din yun sa executions, but I think it's also na parang you also need to try to understand what I'm trying to do. So so yun, like and also like I'm also worried about like questions about profitability. Like, oh, is this collection of poetry or is this work worth 10K as a grant? Or is this like are the points that I'm raising publishable? So yun, that's always what I'm worried about, but also I don't really, you know, try to let that get to me. So yun. I'm very nervous. So I'm part of a collective, but we're only 3. So it's very loose. So, and I really like this is my first time talking to a bunch of writers and I'm very nervous. I'm really sorry. But yeah, I'm glad to be a part of this conversation na we're dealing with things that are out of the standards. So I'm happy about that. And I think I think it's important na yung mga self-published authors come forward with their work, like with events here sa Manila and also like in a lot of other places sa country din na don't necessarily worry about like ano sinasabi ng academe or ano sinasabi ng people who are in power. So yun lang. Yeah, to push. I want stuff like that to be more in the forefront. So thank you so much, everyone.
Maraming salamat, Oscar. Like a lot of issues that have already been raised. My mind is a mess at this point, pero parang I'm kind of just airing all these out in case you may want to talk about them later during the open forum. Like one consistent thing that I think maybe has been pointed out by the 3 speakers so far is, I guess also the notion of hierarchy. Ang maganda dun sa sinabi ni RB, yung takeaway ko dun is how like atomized the notion of hierarchies can get, right? When we think of hierarchies, we think of like, yun nga, parang like an institution, the antithesis of which is maybe like, yun nga, an alternative space, if you want to use this, like that term for this talk. But as RB pointed out, even within, for instance, a community, diba, parang in which there are efforts to standardize a language, there are there are struggles that actually ensue. And I'd like for you to maybe, if you're interested in talking about that later on, please do so, right? And when we think of yun nga, parang such hierarchies, we also think of like efforts at standardization, which certainly is, I think maybe a move that's all too common when we think of degree granting programs, right? As Austere mentions, when you think of an MFA program, when you think of any creative writing program, in fact, like a standard has to be established in order to actually like allow for the grading system to like exist and be out there and be to a certain extent unimpeachable, at least for a STEM. No, but then of course, like these standards also lead to, I guess, they have greater ramifications when we speak of like art and literature in terms of, I guess, what's good and what's not. These are things that we can also talk about. Profitability is something that's already been raised, and I think profitability here also dovetails with a consistent element of all the things that have been mentioned, or a lot of the things that have been mentioned throughout this event. No, parang, and it's really a great anxiety in terms of Philippine literature. I'm putting it out there because I was reading the CCP encyclopedia at minention yan at some point in one of the entries that, well, yun nga, of course, like the audience, parang like getting an audience really is one of the major concerns in terms of Philippine literature. And it's an anxiety, I think, that also has ramifications in terms of how we ought to produce art, where we ought to distribute it, right? What is art in the first place, right? Things that we can talk about. Bakit kailangang maging useful ang literatura, and what sort of implications does that imperative have, no? Okay, let's move on. Sorry, I think I'm blabbering. The next speaker is Rina Puanco.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Rina.
Okay. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Rina.
Okay. So, can you hear me? Is the sound okay?
You can.
Okay. So, like Austere, I'm also taking my MFA in LaSalle, and I guess I'll sort of jump off of what Austere said, because I think we are kind of facing similar problems or similar concerns. So when it comes to constraints that are sort of set upon us by being within this system, I feel like it's a very big thing, because just, I guess, to give people an idea also of my background and where I'm coming from. Very early on, I think I started writing seriously, quote unquote, in my early 20s also. And even at the time, I think it was already part of the greater conversation, like this need for alternative publishing, for alternative avenues of distribution, etc. So I'd begun sort of distributing my work in that way. And there was a lot of resistance for me also to join, like to put myself within that system of the academe. And I think my real motivation was that I wanted to meet more people who who were also sort of preoccupied with the same things. And I guess a frustration of mine when it comes to discussing creative work with my peers, or even with like teachers, professors within the academe, is really this notion of publishability within the Philippine context, where it's like, okay, so this is what you do and I respect that, but who's gonna publish that? And like, let's face it, na there is a checklist na parang to be able to graduate with an MFA, you need to like win a certain award, you need to be published in certain places. So I find myself categorizing my work into two. And that's like work for me, and then work that will tick the boxes of that checklist. And I find that very frustrating sometimes, because of course, if your work ticks those boxes, that's the work that will be associated with you, and also the work that will be given more time and effort, work that will be discussed by other people, and also work that will be, let's say, in class, like workshop. That's the poem that, let's say, the professors will choose, but that's not really the poem that you want to give more attention to. And so that's something that I find really, really constraining and just really frustrating in general. Na parang you can't really pursue what you want to pursue, because the first thing like at the forefront is like, okay, what is the requirement? And sometimes that frustrates me, especially I think coming from the Philippines, where like the established thing already is like you're lucky if you're able to live as an established writer. And established in this sense would mean like being able to make money from what you write and maybe teach on the side, which I think is very common. And something also that we were talking about, me and like MFA classmates, including Austere, is how like there are so many like established and good writers who are in the academe who know that these things are issues already, and that these things are things that need to be addressed, but they also find themselves helpless because their livelihood also depends on, you know, like working within that system. And that's also something that I definitely understand. And it's also something that I grapple with because like right now, for example, like I work in a job that is in sales, and one of my problems, or like my biggest like things that I was thinking about going into grad school is like, okay, how am I going to fund this thing? Like from like a very realistic perspective, na parang how am I going to fund my education, which I'm hoping will eventually contribute to me being able to write, which is something that I want to do, or which I think is my calling, like in this lifetime or whatever. But still, like if I hadn't, let's say, gotten a scholarship, which is like 50-50%, like, you know, luck din eh, na parang if I hadn't gotten that scholarship, then what would I do, like, to be able to do this? So on one hand, like speaking of profitability, I think it's like more than like on one level. Parang super deeply entrenched niya talaga. And like it's so hard to think around it because I think it's not simple. Like it's not something that's simple enough for us to say na parang, oh, it like we should disregard profitability altogether because it impacts all of us. But like how do we grapple with it in a way that is more, I guess, like mindful also? And parang thinking about self-publishing also, because I also participated in a lot of those events, which of course, like I don't think we can do now. It's also a privilege to self-publish because if you self-publish, it means that you have budget to do that. And it, you know, they say like, oh, okay, self-publishing is a lot more like, I guess, inclusive. Like there are a lot more people who can get their work out there, etc. But even if you're in a space like, let's say, even Comic Con, Comiket, like BLTX, those kinds of spaces, parang
About that.
okay, sure. Palas na. Pero yun, parang meron ding meron ding hierarchy in that sense that people will buy what's prettier. And to make something that's pretty or to make something that looks legit, you still need money. So I feel like that's a thing that I'm sort of grappling with at the moment, is like, how do you change a system while acknowledging that maybe the only way out is through? That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of interesting, potentially not controversial, too big a term. Like, oh, I mean, like, I think maybe a lot of the points kind of resonate with a good number of people who are attending this event, no? And I do acknowledge na, well, medyo na-guilty ako dun sa minention ni Wina na to a certain extent, or well, greatly you are familiar with the issues, diba? That maybe plague literary institutions. But then on the other hand, you're also part of it. No, and like for a lot of people to sustain a life that allows you to write means being part of a system that is deeply flawed, i.e. the academia. So like, how do you negotiate that kind of contradiction? No, something that maybe you can talk about later. Maganda yung minention ni Wina na may regulatory moves talaga sa academic programs. Eh. And I think when it comes to LaSalle, you can't graduate from an MFA if you haven't published in the right places or gotten admitted to a workshop. Di ba, Wina? Parang these are requirements. Okay, right? So stuff to talk about. And like one more thing, self-publishing, like even that feels like an arena that benefits the privileged. No? All right. Ang susunod na speaker ay, well, very Pessoa-esque in the sense na maraming heteronyms at personalities without condition. Gusto mong magsalita or do we go straight to the presentation? Presentation na? Yes. All right. Wait, I'm gonna have to...
That's the next step.
All right. Yes. Vince, would you like to talk about that, or are you pretty much good with the presentation? Ox na yan. Okay, maraming salamat.
Sorry, Vince, if it wasn't like
Yeah, sorry.
your timing or whatnot. So, because it wouldn't play the presentation, so I just had to next. But anyway, go Mark.
All right. I think that was our last speaker. Sydney Guerrero is here, but I don't think. Wait. All right. Okay. So we're pretty much done with all the speakers for this event. We're going to the open forum.
Ronaldo raising his hand.
Okay na.
Yeah.
Ayun. So ko yung salita na isa, hindi ko alam kung afterthought or dumaan yung salita mo na nuance, no? So parang feeling ko sobrang siguro yung hinahanap ng natin ngayon, no? Dahil nga sobrang hindi ko makita kasi na problema ngayon yung apathy or na siya yung main problem, no? Parang nandoon siya before siya yung main problem pero ngayon lahat charged except they're charged against us. Parang ganoon, no? Parang lahat charged pero hindi lang lahat ay kakampi natin, no? At from either side, no, may nagkakaroon ng lack of nababawasan ng nuance, no? Nababawasan ng I suppose siguro ang ano no, ang iritis nga rin ng nuance pero mas yung idea ng ano kasi to no, we're considering each other, no, yung mga we're coming from, which I experienced here, no, na you really have to mute ourselves, no. Ako, yung sarili ko in certain ways, no, parang okay, may nagsasalita dito, tapos ako ay hetero, so kailangan ko tong makuha, kailangan ko tong maintindihan, etc. Tapos may nagsasalita dito na student, tapos ako teacher, tapos kailangan ko tong maintindihan at kailangan kong i-mute yung part ko na inaaway siya or nagsasabi na, kailangan natin ng standards, etc. Hindi yan yung point na yun. So yung ganitong klaseng spirit, I suppose, no, yung mas hinahanap, and that's how I get yung idea mo na this is necessary, no. Siguro sa mga nagbababad sa Twitter or sa Facebook kasi hindi natin nararamdaman yung mga ganitong bagay, and since we're more or less locked there, no, or yun na yung default spaces natin, yung social media for some of us. Ang hirap, meron pero hindi, basta parang iba yung spirit, masyadong combative, masyadong aggressive. So I was really very happy, pero babalik din ako sa idea kanina, was that AIDS, no, nasabi niya yung, I think, yung idea niya na enjoy mo yung space. How can you enjoy a space na ganito, nagbubukas tayo ng mga sugat, mga etc. But it's there, no. It's so much better than hours of doom scrolling. So thank you again for the organizers. Saka yun lang siguro yung initial point if you want to.
Thank you. My takeaway from your point is that word combative. I think it's very difficult to mobilize our voices if we're in an environment that's kind of combative, like when you have an idea, okay, let's do something like this, and then it will be combated by someone else just because it's not his idea. It's very difficult to collaborate. And I think at this point, when we are living in a climate that's very much, I think as a queer writer, I relate so much with the norm, the concept of the norm. And for me, the norm is violent. It's brutal. It's all about cruelty. It's all about the bad things that you don't want to see in the humanity. And to defy that, you don't need to be cruel. You don't need to be aggressive. You need empathy. And I think for me, it's such a strong resistance. It's such a strong statement of resistance. If you, for instance, encounter a work of young writers, and instead of like rejecting that or dismissing that, oh, that's useless, that's not necessary, I shouldn't read that, or that doesn't like fit the literary standards that we have in the Philippines. Instead of having that kind of approach, I think it's very crucial for us to be kind, to be more empathetic to each other, to the efforts, to the individualized and also collective efforts of each other. I think there are so many other things too to talk about trauma and the idea of victimhood. Uh, these issues I confront on a daily basis because my current project has to do with domestic violence, same-sex intimate partner violence, and um, I took a lot of notes when Adrian mentioned the idea of victimhood. What is victimhood? And sometimes this is also like related to the third category. Sometimes you as a brown, as a Filipino, sometimes that is a gateway for you to be involved in a publication project, for instance, in, let's say, in the West, in the UK. I had an opportunity to be included in a publication project in the UK. And then at one point I felt like, oh, probably they just included me because I'm brown. All of them were white. So I felt like, oh, it's to be in the beginning, it was a good thing because it was an opportunity for me. But then I felt like there's a sense of my voice was being fetishized at that time because I was coming from that position of victimhood. You know, I present myself as queer, I present myself as brown, and you know, I present myself as somebody who confronts so many intersectional issues, and as an individual, and also as a creative practitioner. And so I felt that perhaps victimhood is like, it's such a huge problematic concept in creative practice that we need to have more discussions about. Is Adrian still here? Adrian?
Hi, yeah, I'm still here.
You're still here. I just want to ask, so how do you deal with that? You're also, total disclaimer, I mean, full disclosure, sorry, I am a victim of domestic violence, but then same-sex intimate partner violence. But then I refuse to be called a victim because I am not a victim. The fact that I am capable of talking and writing about it means that I am a threat. I am a threat to oppression. And I also get the idea that to an extent, you have to recognize that victimhood, because from that idea of victimhood, from that experience of victimhood, you get to create. And I also like the point of Ned Parfan when he said that it's a struggle of form. So I think we can talk more about that, coming from you, Adrian. How do you deal with this? How do you relate with the idea of victimhood? And with Ned, I'd like to ask more about how were you able to cope up with that struggle of form? You know, like in my case, it's really about form. Like you're very, very accurate when I write about some, like, of course, my project now is about domestic violence, queer domestic violence. And the first thing that the first problem that I encounter when I confront the blank page is that how would it look like? You know, what would be my form? How would I be able to sort of convey that message? For instance, a message that talks about the sources of violence, because being an abuser is a trained behavior for me. So like, you know, that kind of message, how do I translate that into a kind of form? So Adrian, can you please tell us more about how you relate with the idea of victimhood? And then Nan, please, thank you.
I think being a fictionist and writing short stories is a kind of way for me to detach from the experiences from which I am, I don't want to say inspired, but something akin to that. There's a wall that distances myself from the reality, and partially also why I don't think I will ever write creative nonfiction. because in as much as for me, writing fiction is very cathartic, I don't know how I would survive writing creative nonfiction or essays or using myself as the protagonist in the actual stories and not veiled in layers and layers of character or character development. Um, not to say that I am denying my oppression by saying that I refuse to be, I refuse to frame myself as a victim, because I do have to contextualize it. I have to contextualize the experience and the emotions from that. It's just that as much as possible, I would rather reclaim whatever power I had that the oppressor tried to steal from me. If that makes any kind of sense.
Okay. Thank you, Adrian. Are you done? Thank you. How about you, Ned?
So,
can you expound more on?
Thank you. Well, when it comes to form, when I started writing poetry seriously back in college in my undergrad years, and this is also in connection with the literary establishment and the rules and the prescriptions. For you to be published back then, you had to try to imagine your poem in the magazines, right? In the Philippines Free Press, in the journals, in Likaan, in the Philippine Graphic. Those were the avenues back then, and some of them still persist today. And I would always see these one-page poems. It has to fit on a page. So that was the expectation. I couldn't get my narrative across through that. So I just tried to approximate the fragmentation that I wanted to talk about. So what came out was a sequence. I didn't know anything about the sequence back then. So I just tried to approximate what some of my contemporaries were doing, and it helped because trauma it's repetitive. Trauma is repetitive. It's a cycle. It's an obsession. So the lyric cycle or the lyric sequence kind of makes sense as a receptacle for that. And also in terms of fragmentation, it's not just in terms of form, but in terms of the voices. I recognized that when I was writing the sequences, there were different voices, and I didn't pay attention to it until much later when um, I was an MFA student at De La Salle. Sorry, MFA din ako. And I was rereading what I had written as an undergrad, and I was shocked to find out that the speaker in some parts were plural, no? Parang shh, stop it or he will find us. Parang, ay, saan galing yung us? So and then that was when it came to me that whenever I would imagine myself as a child, there would be two of me, because like there would be two of me going to recess, two of me going to the canteen, two of me going to the bathroom, and I did not know how to process that, but I just try to incorporate it in my poetry, and yeah, parang ganon. So yun. So I try to approximate that with the form. Na ginawa ko rin fragmented yung voice niya.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. In my case, I'm writing about domestic violence, queer domestic violence, and a lot of my references are from social science. and there is what they say cycle of abuse. So when Ned mentioned sequence, it really makes sense as a form, because like in sequence you get to sort of translate that kind of cycle of violence, cycle of abuse, and the obsession, because it's really like an obsession and addiction. Anyway, I am wondering how then, if you have these kinds of like literary texts, how would you include trigger warnings, you know, to these kinds of contents? Sir Dennis, I think you mentioned about trigger warnings. Like, how would that happen? Like, should it be a label? Like, okay, this is about suicide or something, or this is about blah, blah, blah. What do you mean
Okay.
when you say trigger warnings?
Madali siyang gawin in a aesthetic manner, no. For example, meron tayong mga solusyon ng katulang Chronicles of a Death Foretold, ganyan, o yung mga ibang sasabihin na kaagad first sentence pa lang, or kukuha mo na kaagad sa title, no. Pero I think what my students were asking for really was something explicit, no? Para talagang tatak, parang yung SP something dun sa warning, no, na yun nga striktong paggabay ng magulang ang pangangailangan, something like that. Although syempre dahil sila ay mga adult learners na rin, no, mga college students, no, syempre ibig sabihin wala na sila dun sa 18-year-old threshold. Anything goes for them. So I think yung literary quote unquote na pinag-uusapan natin, may ganun na kaagad, no, na you have to come into it full bodied, no, with full capacity, fully abled, no, or don't come to it at all. So pero medyo may dalawang yung idea ng trigger warning, in that it sometimes shuts you off, pero it also invites you, no, na okay, baka may mga ibang piyesa na pwede mong pasukin, bukas yung mundong ito sa'yo, pero there are minds scattered around, no, that you may not want, that we want to tag for you. So sobrang hanggang ngayon hindi pa rin talaga ako sarado, nahihirapan pa rin akong isipin, no. Hindi lang siya nakakailang, it's there, no, dahil nga wala sa kapanahon na namin yung paglagay ng warnings. Pero syempre meron din tayong iffiness na hindi siya aesthetic, ganyan-ganyan. Actually, I was worried, no, coming here, na it might sound something napaka-simplistic, napaka-ridiculous niyang idea na pag-usapan, but it's a concern, no, and it's not coming from me, no, but it feels like something we should address, no. So again, may mga paraan to do it aesthetically. Usually it has something to do with how you frame the work. So it has to appear somewhere sa title or sa lead paragraph, no, to somehow set expectations na okay, this is not for me. Pag pumasok yung isang estudyante or isang reader na may mga certain di ko alam kung gagamitin yung word na sensitivities, no. Dahil di ba ito yung inaaway ngayon ni Spock's Roque, no, na masyado daw tayong sensitive, no. Pero shall we put these things there, no? We can do it aesthetically. We don't have to go to the through labeling if we feel that's not part of what we're doing. Parang dagdag constraint na naman siya. I was thinking of yung mga speakers nung last part, no, na isa na naman siyang panibagong constraint, no, na parang sa ngayon ayaw natin magpigil ng mga tao na magsulat, but at the same time ayaw rin natin magpigil or gusto nating i-regulate yung pagbabasa, especially for those readers who would like that regulation to exist, no, na sana naman sinabi man lang sa akin, lalo na dahil nga yung iba sa atin nagre-require ng mga bagay na to, no. Sana man lang sinabi sa akin na mayroon ditong suicide. Sana man lang sabihin sa atin na mayroon ditong sexual content, sexual abuse content. Paano kaya yon? So yun, bukas na bukas din ako sa mga ideas, no, pero ito lang yung mga initial na take dito sa idea of putting warnings. Salamat ulit sa pagbukas.
Sa akin, it's not a very trivial kind of concern to mull over kasi it does have implications in terms of what? Like the market logic of publishing. Kasi medyo nauuso na rin, for instance, ngayon yung konsepto ng sensitivity reader, diba? Right? So there are certain works that would get turned down because they might alienate a certain audience, right? And then you have one person or two people maybe in a publishing venture kind of deciding whether your work might be offensive or not, right? So it's like I haven't fully kind of wrapped my head around like this development, pero certainly medyo ano siya, it's something that we have to deal with or kind of mull over, because on the one hand, personally, like I think it's important that or at least there's a cross section of society that's increasingly sensitive or aware of like things that might actually set the way people take back, yung ganyan. But then on the other hand, like syempre pag art practitioner ka, medyo palaging suspicious ka dapat sa censorious moves eh. So I don't know.
Oo, problema talaga. May pagka self-cancellation din kasi yung dating, no? Ilalagay mo ng trigger warning sa sarili mong work, or maghihingi ka ng trigger warning from people who are submitting to you, if editor, or to things that you will have your students read. So parang sobrang hindi ko pa talaga din alam. I just know it's there, and it gets increasingly louder by the semester for me, no? So that's how we at the academy usually deal with time, no? By semester. Pero yun, may issue ng censorship. Actually, when I was yun yung R18, syempre MTRCB din yung kakabit noon, no? At ang dami din problema doon. I remember that they had to cut scenes, etc. Should we also think about doing that to our work, no? To open it up, etc. Nabawasan sa halip na maglagay ng trigger warning, tanggalin yung triggering thing. No, I was sayang wala na si Wina. I remember her yung sinasabi niya na she was trying to work with rules, no? And I suppose some of us, no, we're trying to work towards the rules, yung requirements, no? So this is another added requirement. So kaya nakakailang din siyang sabihin or nakakahiya rin siya. Pero yun nga, it's a concern, at least I think, na hindi lang yata ako yung naka-encounter na so far. Thank you, Mark.
Baka si Dino may gustong idagdag doon sa discussion niya. Actually, yung personal ko na tanong tungkol dun sa binary between journalism and the opinion columnist. Pwede din sigurong ikawing dun sa issue ng pagsusulat laban sa Duterte administration.
Okay. Thank you. Paano ba? For me, I don't know. Nagsusulat ako sa dalawang avenues, and I'm happy, grateful for these two. Inquirer, while it's in the center, ano naman siya, mainstream naman siya, although it's a dying mainstream. So, and merong pinot up si Ma'am Ina Katrina Stewart Santiago na yung disquiet.ph, which allows for longer reads. Basically, yun na yung pinaka na pwede rin naman yung longer forms of writing and I wish, I hope na sana yun nga yung Inquirer ganoon, medyo mas mag-entertain na longer reads na hindi na lifestyle. I used to write for lifestyle, tapos dati pinapayagan pa mga 1,000 words, 1,200. And now there's really yung sa commentary sa Inquirer, it's 600 to 800 words, which is very short. Tapos for me, hindi na ako ganun ka-strict yung tingin ko sa journalists versus opinion writers versus essayists, precisely because unang-una naghahalo-halo rin naman yung discipline nila. Tapos a lot of the rules that journalists themselves follow now are no longer in place, or not even, parang when you look at it, yung mga law abiding or parang ethics abiding journalists today are the ones which are proclaimed na masama. So which is So parang ang dami ng mga bends to the rules na yan, fake news, ganyan. So it's very hard to, or hindi naman sa very hard, pero baka it's not so much a huge a big enough concern or a concern na kailangan natin i-categorize yung mga journalists ganyan lalalala. For me yun nga eh, and I think this would cascade to the next question. For me yun nga eh, ngayon with the dearth of content these days, it might be time for us to not really look at these categorizations so much because yun nga, talong-talo na tayo eh. Mokauson, people are fixated with categorizing her as this and that, ganyan. Antonio Contreras, people are parang fixated na, oh ano ba siya? Academic ba siya or is he a journalist? So parang doon pa lang sa question na yan, talo na tayo. So sayang. So for me, I think the important thing is to write something and to put it out because doon nga nagkakatalo-talo na. And yun nga, cascading to the next question. For I don't know, medyo kahibangan ko na nga lang siguro na baka next thing you know, may lawsuit na. At the same time, some people here who know me, at the same time, may mga middle class naman ako, upper middle class, if some people would say that. Or oo, actually. And nararamdaman ko na yung mga kaibigan ko rito na nag-eye roll na, tingin ko nga upper middle class. So parang kung magka-lawsuit, shit, help. Pero sige na lang, wala na magagawa eh kaysa sa staying quiet. At the same time, there is some sort of self-deprecating comfort that I find in thinking na wala namang magbabasa sa atin eh, unfortunately. So parang, okay, maybe 200 people will read this, okay? But yeah, after this, siguro kung sino man yung na-atake ko rito, hindi naman siguro siya magbabother na mag-file pa ng lawsuit or something like that. Or kung, okay, siguro may insulto ako rito, pero ano na lang, doble ingat na lang. Gano'n na lang siguro ako. At the same time, I can't imagine anyhow else. Parang, kesa sa, wala, it's otherwise it's
Dino, I have a question, quick question. Saan nanggagaling yung mga ganong questions mo na maybe, or yung ganong possibility na maybe I will get a lawsuit just by writing this? Saan siya nanggagaling?
But there are threats from Twitter, yun nga, from the troll farms. They would send whatever eh. Tapos minsan may maririnig ka na rin talaga na or mga even personal friends and family na, uy, basa ko yung kulong mo, ingat ka, parang gano'n. May mga passive ano tawag mo ron, yung aggressions, microaggressions na gano'n na parang parang may atmosphere talaga na wag, don't do it because pero yun nga parang I don't know, hindi naman ayoko naman sabihin na ako suicidal or anything because far from that. I think kaya pa naman habang kaya and when I think about it, grabing mas malala talaga yung conditions ng buhay ng ibang tao. And I can afford some inconveniences here and there. So yun na lang, parang grabe yung mga mahihirap nga ngayon nandun na sa daan nila, kawawang-kawawa na sila. So kaya naman siguro konting minor inconvenience lang siguro yung Twitter threats, ganyan, Facebook. So parang okay, sa mga comments, sa comment section, parang I can live with the crazy cat 1922 commenting ganyan-ganyan. Parang, okay, so it's just crazy cat 1922, ganyan. So, ganun na lang. It's an online world and
yeah. Thank you, Bino.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can accommodate one or two more questions if you have. Anybody from those who did not speak earlier? Daryl, maybe, or Marlon Hakla is here. Glenn Diaz, maybe you have some points.
Meron na talagang recitation na, recitation.
Yeah, right.
Bago
Lauren
tayo magsara.
Emil Jansen. Emil is a writer from Lucena, Quezon. Lila Sayahon. Maybe you want to say something?
May magsasalita.
Jerome Allen
Agpausa.
How to do that? Jerome. Oh, okay. Hi. Here. Yes.
Hello. I'm a young writer. Well, I'm a nobody, so please bear with me. We talked about a lot today about hierarchies, and ako personally as a young writer, naniniwala ako na para mabuwag yung hierarchies na mga ganun. I think ang hindi natin napag-uusapan is democratizing literature, Philippine literature itself. Kasi pinag-uusapan natin kung paano natin nane-negotiate yung mga identities natin, contradictions, so and so and so and so. Pero I think, for me personally, ang pinaka-work na kailangan natin bakasin is sharing what we write. Kasi we're all writing from good intentions. And I find it such a waste na tayo lang din na nagbabasa sa isa't isa. So, ayun, part of democratizing is letting people in, which is napag-usapan na natin. So, para yung iba't ibang mga experiences na babasa rin natin yung narratives nila. For example, mga DH na writers, say from Hong Kong, DH ka, sige writer ka. I mean, parte din sana ng project natin yun para wala na tayong pag-uusapan na romanticization, blah, 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 blah. Diba? And also, naisip ko rin yung part ng democratizing, naisip ko rin yung sharing our work to people. I mean, all of you guys, you all know the how rotten the distribution of literature here in the Philippines is in publishing houses. Visprint just goes down. So and so and so, and you guys are resorting to foreign countries to publish your works. Kasi nga, it's bad politics. So and so and so. Naisip ko yung I read Vix Vasquez's exegesis from her MFA. Meron siyang nabanggit doon. Hello po. Pinabasa po siya ni Sir Mark. Meron siyang nabanggit na why don't we use Insta Poetry to write about EJK? Parang naisip ko parang mag-line cut lang ako, tas social realism, pwede na yun. Kasi binabasa yun ng mga bata. I think ang maganda pag-usapan natin, lalo kayo mga experienced na writers, I think pag-usapan natin kung paano natin i-democratize yung kasi kaya may gatekeeping, yung masses mismo, hindi nila nababasa yung mga ginagawa natin. Tapos meron pang gatekeeping mismo sa part natin, which is yung mga establishments, the Tiempos, Silliman University, so and so and so. Ayun, ang perspective na dala ko dito is yung clamor sa RC Cola ad. I find it amazing, not because yung mga close reading nila is amazing. Matter of fact, I'm so annoyed with the close readings they offer on Facebook. But my thing is, it's surrealism, it's genre-fic, and it's a fiction na enjoyed by acquired taste. Pero at the same time, nakiliti ng RC ad na yun, yung consciousness ng masa, it prompted them to close read. And I think more than pagbigyan na natin yung mga tao, kasi more than, I think for me, selfless as I may sound, I think for me, more than negotiating our contradictions, our identities, dapat mas pag-isipan natin kung paano natin ma-share yung mga goodwill na values ay hindi naman didactic, of course, hindi naman didactic yung literature, pero goodwill na social realism, nakikita nila, ay may namamatay, ay may nagaganto, ay may nagaganyan. I don't know. What do you guys think? What's the step forward in achieving that?
I think it's such a huge thing to do. And I think we need, like what we have been saying, diversity of approaches, diversity of solutions. I don't think that there's just like one solution that we should like do. And like what Mark said earlier, it's very important that there are not just, I wouldn't call them like alternative spaces or alternative publication projects. These are really important publication projects outside Manila, outside the centers, if you will. And I think we can end with that, what you said, Jerome, because you basically told us so many things, so many issues that we have yet to discuss, like creative practice within the academe, literary standards. What do we do with these standards? Writing under the regime, under the regime of Duterte, or writing against fascism and dictatorship still today, remembering our traumas, writing about those nasty things. How do we publish them? How do we let our students read these things? Do we need trigger warnings? There are so many things that we have yet to discuss, and I think this is just the beginning of that. We hope that there will be another session in which we will all gather again together, develop this very good sense of safe space for all of us to talk, to mingle, and not to actually mimic those uneven hierarchies of power that we usually contend with when we go to our universities, when we sort of attend a conference or so on. This is like a very informal, but then we get so many things from each other based on their experiences and also on what they want to do, what kind of future they want to have. Any other thing? Like 10 seconds. I see no one. Okay. On that note, I'd like to thank everyone.
Dry meron.
Si Sophia.
Sophia. Sophia.
Hello po.
Yeah.
I just,
Sophia, yes.
ano po, sa usapang dissent and writing under Duterte's regime, I just wanted to share my writing and how, because I write in prose poetry and editorials and for progressive organizations, and I just feel like doing this has somehow helped in the way in which I personally approach these issues that need to be addressed and talked about. I feel like I'm writing about these things with different volumes and through different in different ways, like such as these really help in establishing that sense of that sort of care that is needed, because when we're faced with such atrocities from the government and their cronies, it's really important to remember that the that our initial reaction towards these, I think, should not solely be anger, but should also be met with silence, and how that kind of reaction to that can be a very productive thing, a space for contemplating on these. Ayun po.
All right. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you. Sophia and Jerome, they're very young and like fierce speakers. So thank you. Thank you. Perhaps I'm gonna be sending an email to all of you just how we're gonna be able to reach out to you or like see your works. If that's okay. Maybe you can also send us your like links to your work that I can disseminate to everybody so that we get to know each other's works. And perhaps if you have any writing groups or communities or collectives that you'd like to introduce to us, then send us a link to, or like introduce your collectives to us, and then we can disseminate that. Again, I'd like to thank Ned, thank you RJ, thank you Dino, thank you Sir Dennis, Adrian, thank you Lawrence, Steno, Jerome, Glenn, thank you Alan, Sophia, thank you Lila, thank you Daryl, thank you Emil, Neem, thank you Sean, Marlon, and Vince, thank you without condition. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And I hope that we meet again soon.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. We want to have another round. Yung isang sabi dito, more specific topics naman para hindi yung ngayon kasi is getting to know each other, so medyo siya, malawak yung coverage, but we can probably organize more specific around more specific topics para mas malalim yung pag-uusap.